what we're going to do, we're going to start off with an introduction to Louise. So I'm joined by a colleague who will be known to a number of you already. She's a seasoned campaigner for both her clients and for charities, especially those working with refugees or tackling poverty. She's worked in public relations for over 25 years. That's a mighty long time, just in case you've not worked it out, and is now happy to count several equally seasoned journalists. I like the word seasoned. As journalists, as good friends. I'm delighted to be sharing this morning's conversation with Louise, the Director of Integra Communications.
Well, thanks, Mark. And my online companion for the next 45 minutes has reported for the BBC, for ITV and for several regional papers. Now, he actually made the news described as a Moldovan to get on TV during the Eurovision Song Contest. And as a reporter, came within moments of accidentally rugby tackling the Duke of Edinburgh during a royal walkabout. But leaving journalism behind, Mark has launched Status Social, one of the UK's first social media consultancies. And he and his team, who I've just got to know fairly recently, have helped the company and his clients to generate 2.4 million in sales. And they've trained more than 3,000 people. And there's a few more this morning. So lovely to have you all with us.
Great. So we're just going to start off then with a poll, just to keep you on your toes. And it'll also be just good to get kind of a measure of the room. So the first question we're going to ask is, do you trust what you read, see, or hear in the news? So there's one choice. You can either pick all the time, I trust it all the time, most of the time, some of the time, or never. So just be really interesting to see what comes up, and then we're going to hand over. I'm going to hand over to Louise to talk about what makes the news in our first section. So 31 out of the 42 votes cast so far. Definitely some of the time is a clear leader. Nobody's put all of the time. 3% have put never trust anything in the news. And that's 95% of your votes. So finishing off there, so all the time 0%, most of the time is 28%, some of the time 70%, and 3% of you never trust what's in the news. So that's really interesting. Thank you very much. Over to Louise.
Oh, thank you. That is really fascinating. So let's be absolutely clear that this morning we're talking about business news headlines. So if you happen to be a minor celebrity looking for that kind of headline, you're in the wrong Zoom call and you can leave now. So we're really focused on business. And within that, we're really looking at not so much the big corporate headline, but it's got to be relevant for you, for those of you who are running businesses, running organizations, whatever they may be. But it might be that actually you are doing your own public relations and you're looking to do some work maybe in time with an agency. So I'm going to start where I always start with my clients, and that it's not about getting news headlines. That's it, that's your PR done. So before you go rushing to talk to journalists, the first and foremost principle is you've got a plan. Please plan what you're going to do before going rushing headlong. Now I'm going to give you the one bit of tutoring this morning. So those of you who've got pen and paper in front of you, I hope you have, I want you to draw 3 overlapping circles. In other words, it's the old Venn diagram, right? So your first circle represents your message. The second overlapping circle is going to be your target audience. And the third overlapping circle is the media. So guess what? You've got a bit in the middle, haven't you? So listen, colour that in, because that is actually the perfect messaging. It means that what you've got suddenly under your control, what you're wanting to say, who to, and how. Which media do I use? So straight away, it becomes less daunting, doesn't it, for you to actually be doing some messaging. So let's just take a look at the messaging, because we haven't got very long this morning to go into this. But first and foremost, when I'm working with clients, you're trying to get a headline. Is it newsworthy? Is it actually news? It may be to you, but it might not be to your audience or the journalists. Just check it out. If you say to yourself, so what? Guess what? I've just launched a new website. So what is what journalists will come back to you on. So really test yourself. Be your own critical friends. So then, of course, you know, you've got to be on message. So you've got to be factual, topical and timely. So think like a journalist, topical and timely. Are you on message? So have you really got it right during lockdown, or are you tone deaf? And I have seen examples you might have seen early on in the lockdown. Airbnb decided to market COVID retreat cottages. Guess what? They were actually encouraging you to jump in your car and go and find one of their cottages. Not a great idea, a bit tone deaf. Let's look just quickly on the audience. Honestly, quick, it's B2B, are you business to business or business to consumer? Because they will be very, very different messaging. Is it local? Are you trying to get on your local radio station, in your local paper? Or is it national or even international? So break that down even more. What about age group? Who are you really going to try to get to? Geography, maybe they're in different parts of the country. Just keep drilling down. But most importantly, understand what your audience need and what they're thinking at the moment. I mean, let's be honest, get a bit media savvy, become media literate, and take a look at what's making headlines. Suddenly, we're leaving the EU. I'd kind of forgotten that in amongst all the other hiatus. But what does that mean for your business and the economy and jobs and so on? So you've probably got something you could be saying at a smaller local level into that agenda. And then finally, of course, it's the media. Just choose, where are people going to see you? What is the most appropriate place to be seen? Finally, sort of on good communications, please be authentic, be human, because actually that's what people really love. Tell a story, because that's actually what journalists do. That's what we're doing all the time, telling a story. Try not to hide behind a corporate veneer. You can see that what that happens. Because we all love a human story. Just one example, so before I run out of time. So you look at Barbour, the clothing manufacturer in the Northeast. Everybody knows they are by appointment to Her Majesty the Queen, but they were making gowns, hospital gowns during COVID. And, you know, you could see the hospital staff picking up the package saying, you know, by appointment to Her Majesty the Queen, this is my hospital gown. So Barbour won a lot of points for that. It's very human, very authentic. But the main thing is then really to get the right headlines. Please do your planning well and be a bit creative as well. Over to you, Mark.
So I'm going to give the perspective from a news editor, from a former news editor, as opposed to being in social media in this first section. And I started out in journalism nearly 30 years ago, before we set up Status Social 9 years ago. And in those early days, it was very different. You know, as a journalist, you were out and about all the time. You were very rarely in the office, apart from just to write your stories. So I was, you know, doing things like I remember one time being attacked in Hull prison by a prisoner who said, "You're from the effing Old Daily Mail," and he swung a punch at me, and they had to clear the gym out. I was wrestled down a path by an angry grandma whose daughter had murdered her grandchildren. I remember hiding my coat under my microphone under my coat during riots, and meeting informants, being dragged across the table in a pub by an informant saying he knew about who'd really who'd committed an infamous murder. Now, those days are long gone, because nowadays journalists, they're just stuck in the office. Fortunately, the BBC, the journalists still did go out, because in radio you obviously have to go out. But even so, the amount of time that journalists went out of the office has really diminished. And in newspapers particularly, and magazines, they just have no time. They have no time. The resources have been stripped back. Staffing levels have gone down so much. It's in some ways, it's a bit of a miserable place being a newsroom nowadays. And so because of that, I think it's really important for us to recognize that to get ourselves in the press, we've got to make it easy. And Louise picked out some really good points there. How do you make it easy? Well, you make it easy by really actually understanding what the news agenda is and what journalists are after. What is your story? That's so what? Oh, the amount of stories I used to get through in my last profession at the BBC. You get some people ringing through with some incredibly boring stories. You know, about somebody's ringing and saying, we've got made some appointments. And we think, well, who cares? Do our audience really care about that? Well, unfortunately, they didn't. So one of the things that I used to say to people, the ones who actually wanted to listen, when PR people or people from firms would ring up and they'd say, oh, we've got the story, and I'd say, it's not very interesting, I'm afraid. Why don't you go away? And why don't you? This is what I'm after. I'm after people stories. So you can have an appointment story. Again, a good example, an appointment story. Somebody joins your business, And how do you make that story interesting? Well, you make that story interesting by actually giving some interesting information about that person. You know, what does that person do? What's their hobbies? You know, what's interesting about them? What's the line about them? What's their background? And then you then present the story. So you say to a journalist, right, we've got a new person starting, and this person is somebody who used to be a clown. I mean, okay, admittedly, we don't employ many former clowns, but if you did employ a former clown, that's the line to go in. Not that you've appointed somebody, it's the clown. So I find that the best thing in terms of really working out how journalists think is to talk to journalists. You know, what do they really want? Talk to people like Louise, because Louise understands what journalists want. I think often we go in there, and I've been guilty of this in the past, where you'll send a story to a journalist and it won't get, we don't follow up to say, why is it not being printed? The good people in PR would call me and say, actually, Mark, why is this not interesting to you? What can make it more interesting? What can I do about it? And the other thing I would say as well is that, just from a point of view of being a former journalist and being in a fortunate position where I don't need somebody to do my PR, although to be honest, I probably do because I don't have enough time to do it. But when I do write a press release, I write it in such a way which is designed to go into the publication without needing any editing. Now, again, I've got the skill set, so it's okay with me, but a lot of you haven't. But if I can write a story which ultimately says to the journalist, again, this has made it so easy by me putting this detail in here, by putting in all the things you need. In other words, you don't need to call me to get any more information. It's much more likely then to go into the newspaper or onto the radio or onto TV. So I do think it's about getting to know people, it's questioning them, and it's just listening to their answers as well when it comes to that. So we're going to go to part two. So part two is about building relationships with journalists. And again, we're going to start off with a bit of a poll. So the poll question is for this one: how confident are you that you can get every story you send to your main media channel published? So are you very confident that every story you send in will be published? Are you slightly confident, not very confident, or are you not at all confident you're going to get your publicity that you want to have? So final votes coming in. So real split on the vote. Let me share the voting with you. You can see it all on screen. So in terms of the well, very only 5%, very confident. That's probably Louise. Slightly is 31% of you. Not very is 33, and not at all 31. So interesting. Definitely a sign of the fact that probably the reason why you're on this webinar in the first place. So over to Louise, who's on mute.
It probably also reflects a reality, because actually the question did say get every story. So I think you're being realistic as well, most of you. But the 5% were which is fabulous. And I think, you know, it does demonstrate why I love to share what I know after 25 years, and Mark does too, that actually many of you will, you know, I really want to encourage you to do your PR and to try to get the most appropriate news headlines, of course. So which is why we're here, to share what we've found. So what's really interesting is a good percentage, 64% are not very or not at all. And I can understand that, because when I first started out, I was working for organizations where I was helping people start in business, and I started to handle their PR, and I was absolutely terrified of picking up the phone to a journalist. I was good at writing. I knew I got the press release right. It was factual. It was the who, why, what, where and when, as Mark was saying. But it's that moment when you've got to pick up the phone. And 25 years on, I have learned that you win some, you lose some. So be rest assured, even the best PRs don't quite get it or every time. But it's actually really important to see a journalist, as I hope journalists see us, and certainly sees me, as a colleague. Somebody who I've built a relationship with and value each other's profession. And that's something else I do talk about in a lot of my training, is valuing understanding of the journalist, but also journalists understanding the PR as well, which is why I always loved having Nottingham Trent University journalism students coming through my company as sort of interns, because they'd often go away and say, gosh, I never knew how much work the PR did for me. So first of all, it's about building relationships. Do get to know the journalist without throwing a story at them. So why don't you just say hi and build an understanding between each other, get to know each other, because to understand, you know, their job. But essentially, what have they got to achieve and by when? Well, the old deadline's gone pretty much. We're working on a 24/7 news cycle. But to be fair, with radio and television, there's always going to be the planning meeting about 10 o'clock in the morning, where they will decide what they're going to cover through the lunchtime news and the evening drive time news. Think about whether you really want to be on the mid-morning show. Is that the right audience? Probably not. But if you're a business, you might want to be on breakfast really, really early on a radio show, or in the evening on drive time. But what do they need to achieve? And who are they writing for? Now, I was with a Daily Mail reporter last week, and he said, Louise, you know, the Daily Mail is run by, let's be honest, middle-class people fascinated in the daft and sometimes crazy things that other middle-class people do. So look at the Daily Mail and just have a look. Yeah, actually, gosh, he was right there. Compared with, say, The Guardian, which is great in long-form reporting and clearly much on a different political spectrum. So, you know, most of you will be going for local. I think we might have James on the call today. He's with Metro, sort of Midlands. Again, great opportunity now to get yourself heard across the Midlands or wherever you're based. Obviously, for Helen, she's in the Northwest. What are people writing about and doing there? Clearly, teamwork comes down to, are they the news reporter, or are they the feature writer? Are they the planner? Is it the person on the end of the phone who's actually got to just plan the interviews into the radio and television? They all have different jobs to do. And of course, what's topical at the moment? Well, you know, honestly, at the moment, it's the economy. Where are we going next? How can small businesses and medium-sized businesses grow us out of this crisis? What are you doing to do that? I'm working with a company at the moment, which is a franchise, and it's going to expand across the UK. Great opportunity for somebody looking for a second income who might be being made redundant, sadly, but who's looking for a second income off the back of their professional services expertise at the moment. So there's a franchise rolling out across the UK, which I'm working on at the moment. So new business opportunities, really topical. And you know, it's the human story, isn't it? So that's what journalists will do, but see them as your, well, not as your friend, as your colleague. They will give you a hard time, and that's their job, because they must actually test your authenticity. And let's be honest, we need third-party editorial to check what we're sending them. If we lose staff and colleagues from the BBC, from other media, we are really not going to be sure that the news, as the first poll said, is actually accurate. Who is there to check it? If I put my press releases out on social media, you could say, well, hang on, she's just posted that out. It's not news. So we do need editors to be scrupulously tough with us, but that means that the coverage is all the sweeter when you actually get it. Deliver what you've promised on time. If you said you will set up an interview with somebody you know or a colleague, send photographs in if that's appropriate. You'll have to take your own, by the way, because there aren't many press photographers around, and that's a totally different subject. You might want to talk to Ben from Brick Consultancy, because he's a great photographer. And finally, if you get coverage, say thank you. You know, journalists do appreciate it. My friend Maisha Frost at the Daily Express, who covers personal finance and business and enterprise, just so appreciates it when small businesses come back and say that has made such a difference. So on that happy note, I'll pass back to Mark.
Thanks, Louise. So the way that we as social work is using social media in what we would call a purely social way, i.e. not just thinking about putting out marketing messages on social media and hoping somebody sees it, but by using it as a way to get to know people, to engage with people, to really understand people. In fact, a lot of the time when I describe what Status Social does, I describe ourselves as a people agency who uses social media to get to people rather than as a social media agency. So how does that work? So how would it work in terms of the way we work with our clients? And this, I think this works just as well with building relationships with journalists. So the first thing clearly is about finding out people's names. And I think often we see an organization that we want to get our press release into or our news into as an organization. So if we want to get into BBC East Midlands Today, The first key thing is actually to find out the name of the reporter or the reporters who could possibly be interested in our story. Or maybe it's the news desk, or maybe it's the planner. And all this information is certainly available just by giving them a call, but if nothing else, it's very easy also to do a search on social media and find out what their names are first. So then it's about thinking, okay, well, if this is an area that we think they might be interested in, how do I then find them and build a relationship with them? So the first thing is then to find out what networks they're on. So obviously lots of journalists are on Twitter. Twitter is an easy place to find journalists. If you do a search on a particular name of an organization, you'll find lots of journalists who work for that organization. Again, it's worth working out. You might be able to find a journalist on there, but trying to find out what their role is really, really important. But okay, that's Twitter. A lot of journalists are increasingly on LinkedIn. They're not as active on LinkedIn, but they're still on there and they're still answering questions. And because if we go back to what I said in the first section about journalists being lazy and not really having enough time, I say lazy. Lazy is a bad term because I'm sure they're not lazy. They're probably overworked, but they haven't got the time to be able to find stories. That actually, to make it easy for them, we need to be able to build a relationship up with them, and we're more likely to be able to get a story to them if we make it easy for them to find the stories. So what happens if they're not on LinkedIn? What happens if they're not on Twitter? Well, could they be on Instagram? Could they be on Pinterest? Could they be on Reddit? You know, what network are those journalists on? Where are they most comfortable with? Now, I'm talking about here from a social point of view, not from a selling point of view. So the next stage then after you find their profile is then to research them. And the great thing about social media is it has so much information on there about somebody. And you'll find that often with journalists, for instance, they don't just tweet or talk about the news on their profiles, they talk about themselves. So for instance, on LinkedIn, obviously, people will put their background information. They'll put down what sectors they've worked in before. They might put down some of their interests. They might put down what university they went to. There's lots of information on there. With Twitter, you can go back through sometimes years of tweets and find out all sorts of information that maybe the journalist has forgotten is on there, but you can find out information about them. So what you're doing then is like any situation where you're trying to get to know somebody. I remember hearing the story several years ago, my friend who lived next door to a guy who wanted to get to know better. He was one of his neighbors. He thought it was important to get to know his neighbors better. And his neighbor was obsessed with solar eclipses. Now, my friend had no interest in solar eclipses, but do you know what the best way of getting to know his neighbor was to ask him about solar eclipses? And I think often with social media, we think about it being a point of view of kind of just throwing our own message down the throat of people, but actually it's about getting to know them and understanding their interests. So then if you do that, then it's about then engaging with them on their terms. So if a journalist is tweeting about going for a run, then you tweet them about asking them how the run is, or you talk about your own run. What are you engaging with them on their terms? We worked for a company that was trying to get in with architects. And when architects tweeted about whether it was right to eat lemon curd from a jar, we then engaged with them about eating lemon curd from a jar. What you're doing is you're getting on their level. You're saying, I'm interested in you as a person. And going back to what Louise said in the very first thing, it's about being authentic, because there's no point going on there pretending that you're the same as them. There's no point pretending to be somebody you're not. You've still got to be authentic, but you're looking for those moments of rapport. So one of the things that we do often before somebody comes to visit us in our studio is we go through their social media and we look at who they are and what they like. And we had a visitor from a local journalist a couple of years ago, and we did some big research into who he was. Went through his Facebook page, because unfortunately most people don't have their privacy settings on lockdown still. Went through his Twitter, went through his LinkedIn, and what we discovered was that he loved Disney. Unusual for a man in his 30s, but you know, I'll let that fly. So he walks into our studio, and of course, what do we have playing on our stereo? Because we have Google speakers in our stereo. What do we have playing? We have playing a Disney soundtrack. He walks into the office and he says, wow, any company that plays Disney must be a great company to work for. And he wrote a fabulous article all about Status Social, because we did the research into him. Whenever we talk to anybody online, we always do research into them. What's they like? Where have they been? Who are they? What's their we find out all sorts of information. There's so much out there, scarily in some ways, but actually from a point of view of a journalist, there's lots of information out there which allows us to work out how they think. So even if you can't talk about it on social media with them, what it means if you do call them up, you can say to them, "Oh, I see you live running," or "I see you spent some time in Algeria," or whatever it might be. And you're then breaking down those barriers, and straight away you go to the top of their list because you've taken the effort to get to know them, which of course as a journalist is really important for them, because of course they're really keen on research, but they just struggle with the time nowadays. So when you do the research into them, already you stand out from them, from other people rather. So find out who they are. And then when it comes then to sending the story, what I would say is don't send them the story on social media, because social media is kind of part of what I would call the marketing mix, or part of the PR mix in this case, is that you're using social media as a way to build the relationships with them, but actually there's no substitute for giving them a call or seeing them at an event and having a chat with them face to face. Because on social media, it's still very easy to ignore you. So I could build up rapport with somebody over social media. I could send them a story and I could say, what do you think of this? Because they're so busy, it's so easy to ignore it. But if I call up the newsroom and I say, hi, Bob, it's Mark here. We've been chatting over Twitter. Great. How's the running going? Oh, yeah, I'm really impressed. You're nearly out the way to the marathon now. Great. Oh, by the way, I'm ringing because I've got a story. This is it. What do you think? And then Bob gives, and Bob gives his reaction, and I say, "What is it? Is it worthwhile? Is it something of interest?" Bob might then give me some feedback, as a good reporter should do. Of course, he's more likely to give you feedback because you've already opened up your life to him and his to you. So using social media as a way to build those relationships with journalists, and think about it in a long-term thing. Don't think, okay, right, I need a story publisher. I better find a journalist and build a relationship with him. What you need to be doing now is, just like with Louise and her circles, is thinking, where's the media? Which media do I want to get on? Which media am I likely to want to get on? And therefore, let's start building the relationships with those people now. So in the future, when I have a story, then it's going to be uppermost in their mind. Plus, and when we go to the next session, also means that if something goes wrong, they're more likely to treat you with sympathy because they know you already.
Thanks, Mark.
Nice, well, the next section.
Mark knows that I really love a good crisis. And I don't really want to start your Tuesday morning thinking about crisis, but actually we've got to do it. But this is going to leave us into our third and final poll. And this question for you is, if your company has a major incident, and that's all relative, isn't it? Is it prepared for handling it? Yes, no, or not sure? Oh, you confident bunch.
It's a mix, it's a mix.
It's a bit of a mix. Yes, no, not sure. How? So we've down to, right, Mark, are we closing the poll? So we've actually got 41 of 44. Come on, the three of you who haven't voted yet. All right, so you can see the final there. It's the not sure. You know, that is the right answer, because there is no right or wrong answer to this. But I love this. When Mark and I put this together, I said, please let me do crisis handling, because actually this is something that we should all be doing. Don't think something's not going to come up and bite you. And I decided to sort of name my bit here is, why do it yourself in a crisis is really not a very good idea. Because you know what happens when something goes wrong in our businesses? The heart starts to beat and we go, oh my goodness. And your first instinct is possibly to panic. We can react very, very quickly before we've had a time to really think about why we're reacting, what we're doing. And that, of course, can lead to a bigger problem. And I have seen that happen many a time in my 25 years, be it in educational institutions, be it in larger scale companies who've decided to leave their crisis handling to a PR firm who haven't really thought it through, sadly, with the company. So I've often been called in after that initial shock wave. So the earthquakes hit, and guess who comes over the horizon? It's Batman, or Batwoman, as Mark's termed me this morning. So there we go. The media might already be on your doorstep, which is often the case. So the aim is to keep your reputation intact. I'm going to assume that you're all great at your PR. So it's been hard won. You've spent years really building up your PR, but it can be destroyed in 5 minutes. As I think Warren Buffett famously said, you can spend 20 years building your reputation and it's destroyed in 5 minutes. It's about being in control. So what I want you to do, like with my clients, we anticipate what might go wrong. When you start a business, if you start in a cafe, first thing you do after your business plan is you put your sustainability plan in place is, should something go wrong, what could go wrong in a cafe? I mean, for goodness sakes, what goes wrong in cafes? Yeah, things do go wrong in cafes. I have just been told, I've just taken on an allotment, and I've now just been told that my courgette are probably poisonous because fothergill and unwinds and various other seeds, apparently for courgettes, have just been found to be containing some kind of toxin, which is now probably likely to poison the courgette eating population of the UK. So I'm now going to go on my allotment and dig them all up. But that's disastrous for the seed companies. Look it up on Google, by the way. I think it hit the headlines a couple of days ago. So what are they doing in terms of their crisis handling? Run a risk audit. So just run through what might go wrong. It's easier to plan ahead if you do that. Have a little communications plan. Honestly, we are not talking about thick tomes here. Yes, if you're BT or a big water company, but if you're a small company, just have a little comms plan, which you can pull out if there's an issue. And by the way, let's not call it a crisis, let's just call it an issue. Everyone will know the plan and they must stick to it. And this is where staff trust comes in. If you employ staff, it's all about internal PR. If they trust you, they will be good and they will, you know, let's put it, behave if something goes wrong. One person only to do interviews, please. You do not want half the staff being rung up by the journalist saying, what's your take on this? No, you must talk to the MD. Yeah, they're clear on the company position, clear on the facts, they're confident to respond. And, you know, honesty goes a long way, and integrity. They're two watchwords in my company: honesty, integrity. But every incident and scenario is going to be different. I can't give you a blueprint. Might involve other partners as well. So who else might have to be involved? Do a coordinated approach. What about timing? It might be important to get information out straight away. So I'm glad I found out about the courgette seeds, because I'm not going to eat courgettes until I've checked them out. But of course, it might be that you can perhaps delay a little while just to see if the waters will calm down a little bit and then react. So just let things settle down. Final word on this one really is, you know something, there's nothing like banking goodwill to then see you through a crisis. One of the examples that I remember, it's years back now, but if those of you can remember the 2007 crash, might remember that in the northeast, Northern Rock suddenly had to close, and within minutes, hours, there were queues outside Northern Rock trying to withdraw their money. But Northern Rock had actually invested a lot in the northeast over decades. They funded Newcastle United Football Club and they did a lot of corporate social responsibility. Within hours, you've got celebrities coming on saying, actually guys, we really need to support Northern Rock. They've done a lot for our region. Now, it didn't save the bank, but in many ways, it kind of rescued the reputation for legacy, because actually it was some good headlines came out of what was pretty bad. Final point from me is just play the long game in building that reputation so that you can pull on the goodwill, notch up positive news coverage. Don't get drawn into being in the news for the sake of it. And you know something, you will have loyal advocates for your business, not just your customers, your suppliers, your clients, but also the journalists who work with you. You kind of just get your friends alongside you. And I think that's just solid business sense, isn't it? Trust and integrity. So how would you deal with a crisis, Mark Saxby?
Well, I think the first thing when it comes to being involving a crisis on social media is understanding the platforms that your business is on, or even the platforms your business isn't on. One of the biggest things I used to hear a few years ago, less so now, is that people would say to me, oh, I'm not on social media because if my business goes on social media, then people will be able to say bad things about it. Well, I'd say to them, the trouble is they're already saying bad things about it. You just have no idea because you're not on social media. And then I'd go on social media and I'd find all these people criticizing their company. Then they'd scream and they'd be on social media before you could say Jack Robinson. But the trouble was that wasn't really the whole answer either, because you've got to really understand how these networks work. Because if you're suddenly, there's a for instance, again, Twitter, I would say Twitter's one of the most it's not very intuitive network to use well. in fact, I would say out of the training workshops we do on Twitter, there's a particular question I ask at the start about how Twitter works. And I would say that out of every 100 people I've asked this question to, maybe one of them has known the answer. And it's a really integral part of Twitter. So if you don't understand Twitter or understand how to use Instagram and how to use Facebook and all that sort of stuff, you shouldn't really be on there unless it's happening properly. Because the trouble is, if somebody puts something on there and it goes wrong and you don't know how to actually get rid of it or you don't know how to handle it. So again, I remember a hotel owner calling us and saying, I'm having all these complaints on social media, on Facebook. Can I delete all the comments? Well, the trouble is that Facebook's not as easy as that, and you cause all sorts of other storms if you then start deleting things. So how do you know? Do you know how to hide a comment on Facebook? Do you know what it means when you hide a comment on Facebook? If you delete a comment, are you prepared for the repercussions of deleting a comment? You know, at the moment we can see if somebody puts out a comment on social media and it gets deleted by a company, straight away people jump even more on that company because they see it as being Big Brotherish. There's some really interesting stats about how if somebody complains to you, how if you don't respond within 24 hours, they're again even more likely to go on and complain on the same network. And then if you still don't respond, they'll then complain on another network. So things start rolling and rolling and rolling. So do you know how to get a direct message, get somebody to direct message you quicker on Twitter? Do you understand the fact that on Twitter you can actually allow yourself to be direct messaged by people who don't follow you, to avoid people complaining in a public forum? So all these things really, really important. So I would say if you're on social media, or even if you're not, it's like, you know, again with parents, we go into schools and teach young people how to use social media properly. And sometimes parents will say, oh, I don't really understand social media, so I'm not bothered about it, I'm not going on it. And I say, you've got to understand it to understand what your children are up to. And it's the same as business owners. So then if you understand it properly, then you know then how to respond in the right sort of way. And there is no one size fits all in terms of this. And a lot of the good principles that Louise has talked about, they very much go over onto social media. But often I think with social media, timeliness is the most important thing. You've got to be quick before it gets out of control. We were working for a car parking company, a national car parking company, and as we were about to start working with them, we were talking about some issues that happened in the past. So we were helping them with their customer service on social media, and they said one day, they said we had a flurry of activity. All these people were tweeting about us. And we didn't understand why, and they're all abusive, and they're all from teenagers. We didn't know what was going on. So we looked, and then one of the team who was a bit younger went onto Twitter and found that somebody called Nathan Sykes had complained about them. Anybody want to wave if they've heard the name Nathan Sykes before? No, you're old. Ross, well done, Ross. So the trouble is with Nathan Sykes. Nathan was in a band called The Wanted, which some of you may remember. And when Nathan complained about the fact that our car parking company was charging nurses for parking in hospitals, unfortunately nobody recognised that it was Nathan Sykes. Nobody looked at his Twitter account. Nobody saw that he had hundreds of thousands of followers, and so nobody did anything about it. Now, when we took over their customer service on Twitter, we had a very similar incident a few months after we started, where Warwick Davis, the actor from what's he was in lots of things, names, nothing comes to mind at the minute, but he tweeted about how he'd been given a ticket somewhere, and he complained about it and said how outrageous it was. It may even have been in a hospital, I can't remember. And what the good thing was because we were monitoring their Twitter account, we saw really quickly that Warwick had complained. So we jumped on there as the company and said, sorry to hear that, Warwick. Send us we'll direct message you so you can get the details and get it all sorted out. So what happened then was Warwick's tweet was at the top of the Twitter feed. The second one down was our one, because he'd mentioned us in the tweet. Because we'd responded, because then people liked our response, they then liked our response, which bumped it higher than all the other complainants, all saying how outrageous it was. Because then when people then looked at that tweet of Warwick's, and of course people love a good complaint story, don't they? So they looked at the responses, and then they saw that we'd responded positively, and the whole thing died down really, really quickly, and we had nowhere near as many issues as what we could have done. So really important to respond quickly. Understand who's making the complaint, obviously we understood Warwick, and then take advice from the experts. You know, if you have a problem, talk to Louise, talk to me. I'm very happy to just to give you some advice about what you need to look at in these situations. I'd much rather you don't have a crisis at all than get into problems. So that's kind of it from a social media point of view, and really from me and Louise. So what I'm going to just finally finish up by saying is, one, please fill in the feedback form, the link's in the chat, and also we're going to open up some questions. So we've got a few questions in the chat. So the first question is from Ben. What are the top 5 things, Louise, that need to be in a press release to get it published?
Okay, top 5, right. So what is the news? So it's the what are you doing, right? Who's doing it? All right, it's the obvious things. So who's involved? Is it the clown that's, you know, just been appointed or something like that? So where's it happening? Maybe they're going to be important is going to be the geography. And is it, again, it's got to show it's topical and timely. So it's going to be the when. One of the worst things I find is when a client comes up to me and says, or not a client, because they wouldn't dare do this to me, but, you know, oh, guess what we have just done? And I'm going, well, that was yesterday or the day before. Yes, sorry, it's old news. You should have told me about a week ago or 2 weeks ago. So, you know, think ahead. But if you're going to put a press release together, by the way, PR does not stand for press release. I hope you take that away from this morning, because it's much broader than news headlines. And essentially, yeah, it's your selling document into the journalist. It's not the final piece. Please don't try and work hard on the headline, because that's their job. The sub-ed will create the headline. You just put it factually. So give you an example, bit of press work I did for free for a Derbyshire village. The headline was Edna 101 to give away her daughter in Derbyshire wedding, right? It got national, international coverage, that story, because it was just a lovely story, but it said it in this topic, yeah? And you put that into your subject. Please don't put in your email press release in the subject line. Can you imagine how many of those they get? So you literally take your news and put it into the subject matter of the email. So think Edna 101 when you're putting yours together. But it's the who, the what, why, where, and when in the first paragraph, please, because that's the time the journalist will go, got it, I'm going to pick up the phone now. Ben, does that answer your question? Thumbs up from Ben.
Great. Kate's put a story in the question in the chat about we're fortunate to win some great clients during lockdown, but we can't name them. Is there anything we can do to still get a story out there? So I would say in terms of social media, that actually one of the great things about social media is you can still put out stories on social media while not naming people, but still kind of talking around it and what you've achieved. I think it is harder when it comes to going to journalists, because they want to have the detail, and often it's the names of the companies that make them stand out. But I do think on social media you can get away with telling stories of what you've done without really giving away the name of the company. Yeah, I mean, anything to add to that, Louise?
Yeah, I think as somebody who's really interested in economic development, I would be looking at, for instance, what's the impact on your company of this happening? So rather than having to name the clients, what percentage increase in your turnover has this resulted in? Have you, as a result, taken on new staff? Are you going to be expanding? And honestly, that is going to be really topical and timely in the next 6 months. So seriously, keep a diary. I often say to people, keep a record of what you're doing each week, each month, because you'll forget these nuggets, but they of news and things that are happening in your company that you can build into perhaps one piece of news about X company that means that you've actually grown 25–30% ironically through this period. So I think it's going to be about impact on the local economy is one way to get around the fact you can't name the clients.
I'd also say as well, Kate, is that people at the moment, we're desperate for good news. There's so much doom and gloom, and we've been putting out, because we've actually had the busiest time we've ever had in the history of our business during lockdown, because people want social media at the moment. And I think when we put out stories saying we've had a really good week and we've signed up this client and that client, one, yes, people love the good news, but also it reinforces the fact that they must be successful. So therefore, then we must be worth talking to. And you'll find the same with your company. The more you talk about the good stuff, the more people actually think these guys are good, and therefore they want to talk about it without naming them, because I don't think you need to. Anybody got any final questions?
While I'm on, well, if there's any more questions, I think we've got Minesh on the call from London, and I just love to tell you all about a lovely story about the way a company called Holy Moly Biscuits, which is on here, and got together with T-Rex Teas, and both separate businesses, but during lockdown they launched Hug in a Mug. And I tell you, I kid you not, I've been sending Hug in a Mug gift packs all over the UK, because I just love the idea that somebody is receiving a fruit infusion tea and a Holy Moly biscuit in a pack, and it only costs, only costs £4. I mean, raising, but £1 goes to the Trussell Trust. And I spotted that, and because I'm involved with the Trussell Trust as well, I thought, what a cracking creative promotional idea where the two businesses come together. I don't know, Minesh will probably be able to tell us in chat how many Hug in a Mugs have gone, but I just think something like that just was so topical and timely. It was on message, and you know, spot on. So just all of you think about creative things like that, which will really get you noticed.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Please leave your feedback. Final call for feedback. We'll leave the Zoom open till everyone's done it. That'd be great. Really good that you joined us. And if you have any follow-up questions, me and Louise would be happy to answer them. We're both on LinkedIn, so feel free to contact us through there if we've not already contacted you. Yeah, great. And enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Bye.